If you're confused about provisional sum and prime cost items, and then how to set up correctly in Wunderbuild to make it easier to track against and then reconcile those provisional sum and prime cost items, stick around because I'm going to make it really simple and show you how I go about doing that in Wunderbuild. So in this video, you're going to learn about how to allocate a provisional sum or prime cost item to an estimate, how to then convert those PC or PS items into their own cost categories to make it easier for you to track bills when they come in against those provisional sum and prime cost items. And the reason we want to do that is so that when it comes time to reconciling your PC and PDS items, all your bills are in the one place. And then when you go to create a variation adjustment, it makes it very simple to do so. And that's the other thing you're going to learn, how to create that variation adjustment and how to prepare it so that when you send that variation to the client to reconcile your PC and PS items, it's very straightforward. There's no confusion and your client knows exactly what that variation extra or credit is to help you then balance the contract.
Okay, so I'm in an estimate here in Wunderbuild, and the first thing I want to show you is the PC and the PS items. So there's a couple in this estimate, and if you don't know already how we allocate provisional sum or prime cost items in Wunderbuild to an estimate is through this cost type toggle here. So you can see here this one, demolition to existing property / structures. I've toggled on provisional sum. So from this cost type column here, you just toggle on like that. So there's allowance, none, or you can choose prime cost or provisional sum. And I've also been asked before, like, what's the allowance cost type toggle? I think it's just a general allowance sort of allocation that you can allow in an estimate. But yeah, I don't know many people who use that. So really just stick to provisional sum or prime cost item. So this one was a provisional sum. And then I had one more, which was the tile supply. I had this internal floor tile supply, 60 square meters. As a PC item toggled on there. So they're my couple of prime cost and provisional sum items in the estimate. Now, I do use that toggle under cost type when I'm doing an estimate, just to make it easier to quickly toggle on and off items that are either a PC or PS item. And then when you do the quote preview for the client and you send them the quote, you can get it to show nicely like this here, where all your PC and PS items will show under this tier, which in Wunderbuild, they call it the allowances section of the quote preview. So I've just renamed it to prime cost and provisional sum allowances. So if you do have that cost type PC or PS item or even allowance toggled on, they'll show up in this quote preview section here. So now that you've priced the job, you've given the quote preview, quote proposal to the client, then let's just say the client says, yep, we want to go ahead, let's sign contracts, and it's going to turn into a live job. What I then do is I move those provisional sum and prime cost items to their own cost category, like you can see here what I've done. So how you do that is you just go to a cost item within the estimate, and then if I just show you, I'll just click this one as an example. So just select the item, and then hit this copy move, and then you'll select move to category. And that's when I'll move it to these new cost categories that I've created within the estimate. So the reason I do that is because I've had jobs before where you can have 10, 15 prime cost provisional sum items sometimes, and you may have multiple cost items that make up a provisional sum or prime cost item in the contract. So I found that when they're just scattered throughout the estimate, it's a bit more harder to track. So I like to create the provisional sum and prime cost items in their own category, as I've done here. So exactly those two same provisional sum and prime cost items that I showed here in this estimate, I'll just create a new estimate and we'll copy estimation, and then I will create those new cost categories, which I'll call in the same name as the provisional sum or prime cost item, and then I'll allocate those items to those new cost categories. So the other thing to be mindful here when doing that, it's going to also potentially throw out your contract figure, what you've won the job based on. And the reason it'll do that is because, at least for me, when I price the job, I'd always allow markup on those prime cost and provisional sum items. And then when I've won the job and I want to display those costs to the client, it would be excluding markup. So there's a bit of a calculation that needs to be done there. So you can see in the original estimate here, I've got a 25% markup, and on those prime costs, well, this one's the provisional sum. You can see I've got the client cost at 12.5, where the builder's cost was 10K. And on that tile supply item, the builder's cost was 2,400 and the client cost is 3,000. So obviously when you're pricing a job, particularly if you have a few prime cost and provisional sum items, it can get, maybe a bit, you don't want to price the job without putting your markup on those items, particularly if you have large provisional sum and prime cost items in the estimate. So I always just allowed markup on the whole contract price, including prime cost and provisional sum items. However, then when it came time to go to contract and display those PC and PS items to the client, it would always be excluding markup, and the markup that had been allowed on those items would be spread throughout the rest of the estimate. So going back to what I was saying, the original markup was 25%. Now in this estimate, you can see the markup's gone to 26.6188, and the reason it's a weird number like that is just so that I could get the total contract price to balance to what we've won the job based on. So you can see here grand total 283,650, and in that original estimate it's the same figure. So yeah, if you're interested to know how I did that, just drop me a comment and I'll do another video on that, because it's a bit of a spreadsheet that I use and there's a bit of a process to go through that. So yeah, if you're interested, drop me a comment and I'll do another video, and I'll put a link to that video in the description of this video. But for the moment, let's just go back to the estimate where we've now added in those new cost categories for those for the provisional sum and prime cost item. And you can see I've added them in based on the cost price that we want to make the client aware of, that this is the builder's cost price, 10K for the demo to existing property structures, and then it was 2,400 for the internal floor tiles. And you can see that matches up with what we've shown them in this quote preview as well when we've sent them the quote proposal. Yeah, this figure being inclusive of GST. So 10K there and 2,400 there. And yeah, these figures are inclusive GST, like I just mentioned. That's why there's that difference there. But yeah, so now what we can do from here is we can now convert this estimate, which has these separate provisional sum and prime cost items, into a job. And then once I've got that estimate converted into a job, like you can see here now on the screen, this is a job now. What we're then going to do is obviously we're going to incur costs or bills, receipts against those provisional sum and prime cost items. And like I mentioned earlier, the whole reason of allocating or having these provisional sum and prime cost items as their own cost category is so that when a bill comes in and we're trying to allocate bills and reconcile our provisional sum and prime cost items, it makes it a lot easier when those PS and PC items are their own cost category. So in this example here, I've got a couple of bills that we've received. So one was for general demo as quoted here, like I've got in the description, 10K. And then I've got another line item as an example here, asbestos removal, 2K. And so we've got 12K in total costs that we've incurred. And our budget that we've shown to the client is $10,000. So we're over 2K. So from here, what we want to do then is obviously be mindful of what our provisional sum and prime cost items are, allocate to the correct cost category like we've got set up. And then once we finish the works and it's time to reconcile a provisional sum of prime cost items, we can do that in Wunderbuild through this feature here through a variation adjustment. So if I select all these items here, just like that, and then I click variation, and I click this one here, create adjustment. So what that will do then is it will create a new variation as an adjustment. So, and I'll show you how that works. So I've got here new variation. Let me just copy this as the name. And I'll call this one VO for variation order. And then I'll put the provisional sum name here. So I know this variation is related to this provisional sum. And then what I will do here is I will add the markup to each line item that we're allowed to charge on the extra over on our provisional sum allowance. So see I've added 20%. Let's assume that's the builder's margin allowed for in the contract. And then what I also want to do is add 20% to this negative 10K figure to get it to balance. So it's a negative here because obviously this was our original allowance. And now what we're saying is, okay, well, we've spent 12 grand in total. We've got to take off what we had allowed in the contract, which was 10K. And that's how we get that $2,000 difference there. And then what we're doing on top of that is adding a 20% markup. And that's how we get this figure here of 2,400 ex GST as the variation total there that we're going to bill to the client. And just going back, so it's an adjustment because we're adjusting against this original allowance. So that's why it's a variation adjustment. And that's why I use the variation adjustment when reconciling prime cost or provisional sum items. So the only thing I'll also do here is I'll just change this wording because I want this to say less demolition to existing property structures, and then I'll call it here PS allowance. So I'll do that just so that when this gets sent to the client as a variation form, it's very clear to them how we got to where we are in terms of this variation amount being charged. So let's create that. Okay, so that's been created now. And now on the opposite end of things, we can also do the same anytime we need to issue a refund to the client. So with this example here, tile supply, the budget allowance was 2,400. We spent 2,000. Let's just assume that that was the total amount that we ended up spending for tile supply, and we need to give the client a credit, which will be $400 in this example. The process is exactly the same, where we'll select all the items, variation, create adjustment, and then you can see it shows as a $400 credit there to the contract. So it's a variation credit. So let me just go there, copy this again, call this variation order underscore prime cost tile supply. And in this instance, I'm not going to add markup because we're giving the client a credit. There's no builder's margin on that credit. It's just straight cost. So we had allowed 2,400. We spent 2,000, and that's why there's a 400 ex GST credit to go back to the client. And we'll use the same. We'll call it the same thing like we did before. Less internal floor. Let's put brackets. Tile supply. PC allowance. And then hit create. So now you can see how these provisional sum and prime cost items have been created within the job to have their own cost category, and then also then how bills are allocated against those PC or PS item cost categories, and then how we can create a variation adjustment on our PC or PS items to reconcile them in the contract. And once we create that adjustment, you can see it's just going to come up as a variation here. So then once this is approved as such, we can send this to the client. They can approve it as well. Yeah, it should be the other way around. We'll send it to the client, they'll approve it, and then you can come in and approve it here. And then once it's approved, it'll then get added to our progress claims section. So if I go to progress claims, create new, you can see it's there now, ready and available to claim. So with prime costs and provisional sums, they're essentially, once reconciled, either an extra to the client or a credit, and that's why they're treated like a variation as such. So we can claim accordingly or issue a credit back accordingly, depending whether we've overspent or underspent on that PC or PS item. So you can see it's there, ready and available to claim now. And actually the only other final thing is how it looks when it's printed. So if I go to print here, you can see this is how it comes up in Wunderbuild. And again, why I add those bills or invoices as separate items is so that it's very clear to the client when they do receive this variation, how we got to where we are. So you can see here, there's what the demo cost us, there's what the asbestos cost us, and we just add in the original allowance with that 20% markup, just so that it balances correctly. So, because obviously we've added the 20% here, and actually what we need to do as well is, just fix this up, is we want to show this as toggled on if you're showing the markup to the client, and then it makes it a lot more clearer when they do receive that variation form. So I'll just approve it again so I can show you how that looks. Okay, so you can see now this makes a bit more sense, where we've got the original cost here, then it shows the markup separately, and now it makes a bit more sense where we've got here was our original allowance, and we're just showing that markup again just to get it to balance, so that we're issuing the correct variation amount to the client.
So I hope that gave you a better understanding of how to deal with provisional sum and prime cost items, not only during the job stage when you're trying to reconcile those PC and PS items, but also how to set them up correctly from the initial estimate to make your life easier to track those costs when and if that estimate becomes a job. So if you found the video helpful, just make sure to like and subscribe, as it helps the channel and gets the video to more builders out there just like you. And if you're not already a member, make sure to join the Wunderbuilders Facebook group, where you can post questions, comments related to this video, or any questions and comments in general related to Wunderbuild or running a building business or anything project management related. So that link is in the description, so check it out. It's free to join. That's all I got for this video, so I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye for now.